The story begins with a young man who has traveled the galaxy. This place has no boundaries, and there are countless monsters and constellations lurking here. There are many different monsters traveling in that galaxy, including dragons. Among them, the ferocious seven-headed dragon stood out and was attacked from all sides. But he managed to escape and fell into the abyss of the volcano. As soon as he landed, he was surrounded by a mob of animals wanting to tear him to pieces, their eyes full of ferocity. The main character's name was Randy, and his body was covered in red webbing. A huge purple spider stood in front of him, studying him from all sides. The spider opened its jaws and prepared to swallow Randy whole. From the look on the protagonist's face, it was clear that he didn't have the slightest fear of these monsters, but he realized that he had a long fight ahead of him against them. 2 years passed, and he finally defeated those monsters. The guy looked at the bodies of dead monsters scattered everywhere, and thought that he had wasted a lot of time, and now he wanted to return to his homeland, Earth, as soon as possible. Suddenly, he heard a harsh voice addressing him, and he had a hard time identifying who was speaking. However, he looked up at the red sky and realized that it was a constellation speaking to him. When Earth first contacted the Abyss, humanity learned that mythology is not just a figment of the imagination. The beings called constellations appeared to be the closest to divine entities. They bestowed blessings on humans and expanded their ranks of followers. As the number of followers grew, so did the authority of the constellation. Earth, populated by nearly 10 billion souls, became a valuable resource for the constellations, and they fought to win new followers. Among them were the more aggressive constellations, wanting to take over the Earth by force rather than blessings. Randy went back to his good old friend, and during lunch, he told him about his fight with the monsters they called constellations. The Goblin King heard this and was shocked. He couldn't believe that his comrade had been fighting monsters for 2 years. Randy explained that those 2 years were very difficult because food was scarce, and he had to eat constellation, which was his priority because of his interest in cooking. The Goblin King opened his mouth in surprise. He didn't expect Randy to defeat the constellation, so instead of killing it, he just took the milk. The Goblin King looked at Randy and realized that he was very different from the others. The Goblin King wanted to taste the meat Randy had taken. According to legends, whoever eats the constellation meat will become a powerful ruler. But when he tasted a small piece, his eyes and mouth burned with unbearable pain. However, he had a magical power that he retained with the help of constellation magic. Thanks to the oil from the mystic constellation, the meat gained even more power. The protagonist looked at the Goblin King and couldn't understand what was wrong with him. Randy looked up at the stars and longed for Earth and his family. Let's go back to the very beginning and find out where Randy's story began. It was 10,000 years ago by the standards of the Abyss. Everyone thought Randy was a little strange and kept asking why he was always lifting that barbell. He always answered that he wanted to be the strongest, but no one took him seriously. The young man was prone to violence from an early age, a result of being severely bullied by high school students during his childhood. Randy had been an orphan since he was a child, and he realized that he could only rely on his own strength. He realized that he needed to train constantly to ensure his protection. Every day he grew stronger and stronger. His dream was to become a hunter, a new profession that appeared in the abyssal age. Hunters were in the business of protecting people from the dangers of dungeons and monsters. The artifacts, poisons, and items obtained after killing monsters were highly valuable, and the dungeons where they dwelled attracted many people seeking wealth and fame. His superior advised him to temper his fervor and not risk his life. He warned that it was too dangerous to fight rank monsters. Even elite hunters had died in battles with such monsters. The next day, Randy went to the dungeon with his team to fight monsters. One of the monsters was attacked with great speed, and everyone thought that was the end of Randy. But little did they know that Randy had been practicing extremely hard. He struck the monster in the jaw, and the monster was defeated from the first blow. The protagonist never had any interest in magic and never regretted it. He always thought that martial arts were more simple and convenient than magic. But through constant training in martial arts, he learned their true essence. It was already dark, and the protagonist sat on the ground, thinking about the fact that despite all the hard training, he had not yet reached the level that some martial arts masters had managed to achieve. He was annoyed, but promised himself that he would continue practicing to reach the top of his skill. The next day, when Randy was training, he was approached by Mr. Nia, the constellation of the Abyss known as the Goddess of Libra. She smiled as she looked at him and got straight to the point, offering to give him a combat contract. The protagonist was unfazed and accepted the offer. This greatly surprised the Goddess of Libra, as no one expected her determination. Randy was only interested in one thing, whether he would gain power if he won this fight. That was the most important thing to him. Randy asked the Libra goddess why she chose him, given the many other good hunters with higher ratings and fame. The goddess of Libra replied that she saw the coming danger that threatened the world. The evil constellations would attack Earth in full force, and compared to these threats, monsters and dungeons would be nothing. Randy was considered the key to preventing this threat. The Libra goddess took him by the shoulder and assured him that she would make him stronger through hard and ruthless training. At that moment, the Libra goddess was afraid that Randy would refuse the offer and she would lose her. The Libra goddess held out her hand to him, and her face showed signs of nervousness. The protagonist realized that if he made a contract with the constellation, he would become the new avatar. It was a very difficult decision. Since his soul was bound to the constellation, he had to live under constant restrictions. Randy realized that this carried a great responsibility and carefully considered whether to agree, for the fate of all mankind rested on him. The goddess of Libra flew up into the sky and announced that she had prepared a training facility in the abyss where time flowed differently. She warned that he would have to train alone for several hundred years, and even if he chose to interrupt his training, he would not be able to return home. The boy pondered for a long time, but his desire to become the strongest hunter outweighed all doubts. In the end, he agreed and said he would go with the Libra goddess. He explained that his connection to the world was not as strong, and he wanted to keep the letter for one person. After saying this, the Libra goddess raised her hands and a huge black hole appeared in the sky. The goddess of Libra told Randy to think hard about where he wanted to leave his letter and promised to send it with his mind. The protagonist resolutely approached the black hole and touched it, preparing for the challenges ahead. Immediately after his touch, he was pulled inside the black hole. Randy looked around and was surprised because the place resembled a dungeon. After realizing that there was nothing but rocks and emptiness, the protagonist began to actively train. At this time, the Libra goddess shared information about her find with her staff, seeing Randy as a potentially great candidate for an avatar. Her subordinates looked at her with concern, for when she is so confident in her predictions, something usually goes wrong. The protagonist was continuing his training session when suddenly a huge blue tornado appeared from behind, sparkling with lightning. Randy turned around and realized it looked extremely dangerous. Thinking that this was probably another test from the Libra goddess, the protagonist had no fear. He believed that he had to face danger head-on in order to become stronger. As the tornado approached him, he felt a sharp pain, thinking he would be torn apart. But he was determined, knowing this was a test from the goddess. After a powerful magic storm passed through, the illusion magic enveloping the Libra goddess's territory disappeared. This magic served as a basic safety measure. But before Randy realized what had happened, the magic storm was upon him once again. Not even the goddess could have foreseen such a thing. The Libra queen was very worried as she was expected to sense his presence. But the protagonist never showed up. Her servants had thoroughly searched the entire citadel, but still couldn't find Randy. The goddess of Libra then turned to one of her most powerful servants, Archangel. Archangel promised to find him at all costs and keep him out of harm's way. She knew it wouldn't be an easy task because he could be anywhere in the galaxy of the world. Even the constellations couldn't cover his entire territory. A few weeks passed, and the main character suddenly woke up on the ground. He looked in front of him and saw many rocks. It seemed to him that this was the next place for his trials. Randy saw a huge monster in front of him and assumed that his next challenge was to defeat it. In the first moment, he thought the monster looked like an onyx and perhaps not that high-ranked. He hesitated for a long time, but then decided that the Libra goddess knew what she was doing. He didn't even realize at that moment that she had lost him and was looking for him. Randy gathered all his strength into a fist and struck the monster with full force. The monster showed no reaction as the blow was too weak compared to its size. However, the protagonist continued to attack, realizing that he needed to become much stronger to defeat this monster. Randy felt himself building up more and more strength with each blow. After several thousand strikes, he was finally able to overpower the monster. Realizing that he had defeated the monster, Randy realized that he was now a rank B hunter. He realized that he may not have had the talent like the other hunters, but his perseverance and desire would make him the strongest. Suddenly, the monster walked up to Randy and looked at him with affectionate eyes. The protagonist then befriended the monster, sat on its head, and they set off to find a place for their next training session. After a long journey, they met a blue storm that Randy had been in for a long time. By the standards of the abyss, years. The protagonist decided it was a gift from the goddess that would lead him to his next challenge. After getting into another place with a monster, Randy realized that he had gained an advanced level and realized how great the magic storm was. This storm filled his chakras, making him stronger and getting rid of his fatigue. The protagonist felt that he was getting stronger by the minute. He concentrated the chakras in his hands and was ready to use the divine space art. Randy looked at his hands and realized that he was ready for the next level of martial arts. He looked forward to the next training session to get even stronger. The protagonist, standing by the ocean, felt mixed feelings and didn't know how to move forward with his training or passing the tests. Suddenly, Randy's idea came to him. He decided to train underwater. Without hesitation, he plunged into the water and found before him a multitude of fearsome fishes that he had never seen in ordinary life. He soon realized that the water he was in was poisonous, and its poison began to seep into his body. The poisonous fish started attacking Randy, biting him. The protagonist struggled to get out of this poisonous water, realizing that just a little more and he would have died. However, as he was getting out of the water, he noticed a bright light at the bottom, and he realized it was something important. Randy still thought this was a test from the goddess of Libra, and that she was giving him these tasks, but he was sorely mistaken. The protagonist began to train and focus on accumulating more chakra, as it could save him from the poisonousness of the water and fish. It had been years without a chasm since Randy had been in this place. Randy, although getting stronger due to the chakra, began to suffer from hunger as he couldn't find food. Suddenly, he saw a dead blue fish thrown ashore by the waves. The main character looked at her with peculiar eyes as he hadn't eaten in years. Randy didn't know how to cut this fish as it was poisonous and even melted all the stone kitchen appliances. The monster decided to help him and handed him adamantium, a treasure even among stone-type monsters. When attempting to cut fish with this material, Randy was surprised that it did not melt. As Randy took a bite of the fish, green vapor began to emit from it. The protagonist felt his tongue begin to go numb, but at the same time, he felt his strength increase. When he tasted a piece of fish, he realized that he needed to hunt and eat more such fish so that his strength would grow even faster. And so more years of abyssal years passed. During this time, the protagonist's mind has changed a lot. Over the years, Randy has developed resistance to many types of poisons. The protagonist could easily raise his divine space art level, and he became very strong. Randy couldn't understand why the goddess of Libra hadn't summoned him yet. He had gained resistance to poisons and reached an expert level that was unattainable in his world. After everything, the main character approached the monster and told him that their paths were diverging, and he should leave to become even stronger. He didn't want to put the monster in danger. The guy then dived back into the poisonous ocean, but it was no longer a threat to him as he had completely become resistant to the poison. The poisonous fish no longer attacked him. He had turned into a completely different person, much stronger than before. He continued sailing through the ocean and finally found the source of magical power he had seen on the first day. As he got closer, he saw a blue portal. It was the next stage of his training. When he arrived, he found many monsters in front of him who looked at him hostilely. One of the monsters approached Randy and threateningly said he was about to cut off his head, pulling out a sword. The protagonist prepared for the fight and strained all his chakra in his left fist. When the sword collided with his fist, the sword shattered into small pieces. The monsters were amazed and couldn't believe their eyes. They had never seen such power in a human before. The protagonist jumped 2 meters into the air and kicked the monster hard. The monster fell to the ground and remained motionless. All the other monsters were shocked as they had never seen this kind of strength in a human. However, the guy didn't want to fight them. He pointed his finger at them and said that he was here for a test. All the monsters looked at him with bewilderment and asked what other test. One of the monsters started yelling at him and thought the man wanted to fight their leader. A multitude of monsters pounced on the protagonist. Their intention was to tear him apart, and they knew no mercy. But Randy, despite their large numbers, easily dealt with them in just a few minutes, scattering the monsters to the sides. However, the guy realized that even with those skills, he couldn't fight surrounded on all sides in the open. The monsters were determined and could not afford to lose, as it would be an embarrassment to them if an ordinary human defeated them. Suddenly, Randy was attacked by mutant dogs in large numbers, and he realized that there was no end to them, and his power was not limitless. The protagonist has realized that he has no choice but to fight in this territory that is under the rule of this constellation. Randy continued to fight these monsters for a long time and finally defeated the entire crowd. After his victory, he noticed a small building in front of him, and his curiosity led him to decide to explore it. The protagonist kicked the door with his foot and announced that he would borrow the place for a short time. Inside, he saw a smiling monster who greeted him and started making soup. Randy was surprised to find a restaurant even in such a dingy place, and the monster good-naturedly explained to him that you had to eat well for good combat training. The main character felt ashamed of himself for breaking the door of such a kind monster, and he apologized and asked for some food since he hadn't eaten in a while. As he approached to get the soup, the monster suddenly threw a large pot of poison at him. Randy wasn't concerned about it as he was immune to the poison and didn't even feel it. The monster began to stutter, not realizing who was in front of him or how a person could have such abilities. The monsters started coming through the door, ready to attack Randy. The protagonist scrambled into a corner, grabbed a chair and shouted, urging them to come over, promising that his strength would be enough for all of them. After saying that, Randy started fighting the crowd of monsters using just a chair as a weapon. At this time, the goddess of Libra was very worried about Randy's fate and tried to find him in the abyss but could not locate him. Her subordinates were confused and didn't understand how to find a man in such a dangerous place where he could move at will. But it didn't take long for the protagonist to defeat all the monsters, and he couldn't realize how many more enemies there would be. As a result of comprehending the martial art, Randy's senses were heightened, and he felt something special coming from the cauldron. The guy felt that this cauldron was emitting tremendous energy, and he realized that it contained something unique. Randy decided to take the cauldron with him and explore, but one of the surviving monsters grabbed his leg and begged him not to take the cauldron. The monster had tears in his eyes and claimed that he had achieved this cauldron by killing many others. The protagonist didn't feel sorry for the monster and punched it in the face, saying that this monster got the cauldron by killing others. In one of the martial arts stories, Randy learned about a retired martial arts master who owned a small classic diner. Randy came to this abyss based on the initial goal of finding a suitable place to fight. However, a chance acquisition of a diner inspired him with new ideas. He renovated the diner and named it after himself, creating a place where he could combine his battles and his experiments with cooking. For several centuries, by the measure of the abyss, Randy continued to fight monsters by day to gain experience and experimented with recipes by night. One day, however, the former owner of the diner came with his brothers to get revenge on Randy for taking over his establishment. The protagonist noticed that he had achieved harmony of body and mind through prolonged mortal combat. He realized that his skill level in martial arts had become so high that masters from all over the abyss would be admired for his skills. The monsters were stunned and lay defeated, and it was incomprehensible to them how an ordinary human could defeat so many enemies. Eventually, once the demons realized that their strategies weren't working, Randy also realized that he needed to make changes in his life. The protagonist realized that he was stuck in this abyss for a long time and stopped developing in martial arts. He began to study the art of cooking and absorb energy through culinary studies, but his progress in martial arts stagnated. Randy realized that he could no longer achieve harmony of body and mind, and this caused him frustration and anger. One day, the protagonist is all pissed off about it all, so much so that he opened the door of the diner and ordered the demons to stop this production and summon him back to Earth where he could really develop and apply his martial arts skills. As soon as Randy stepped into the light, a whole group of monsters immediately pounced on him. Randy really enjoyed the battle, for it helped unlock his true power and accelerated his growth. When the protagonist had dealt with all the monsters, the biggest monster he had ever seen in his life appeared in front of him. The monster laughed hard and asked Randy if he was scared. The monster's words inspired the demon, and he lunged at Randy with full force, screaming that this was his last day on this planet. However, the guy stopped his sword with just one hand, and it didn't cause him any problems. The demon couldn't believe his eyes, because no one had ever been able to resist his sword so easily before. Randy looked him in the eye and said loudly that he was afraid that at this rate he wouldn't be able to develop his martial arts. After that, he was attacked by all the monsters. During the battle, the protagonist recalled a rank A hunter who described his power as a feeling of absolute certainty. However, now that he had reached the expert level, he realized that earlier in battle, he had felt like he was in a corner, attacking without order in all directions. That feeling of lack of confidence had completely disappeared, and now the protagonist was completely calm, feeling confident. After a long battle, Randy was able to repel an enemy attack with divine space art for the first time. The protagonist learned how to use his opponent's strength against himself, and this method was called kuzushi. After a long battle with all the monsters on the ground, the main character just went into the house and started cooking. The next day, the guy left the house and was pleasantly surprised to see no monsters. But the demons swept him up from the sky and fired fire from the fiery beams. One of the demons ordered them to keep firing, claiming that Randy was a master of close combat. After the attack was over, all they saw was the silhouette of a man in the smoke. The protagonist successfully blocked all attacks with divine space arts, and his body became even stronger after the demon attacks. Randy started defeating all the monsters in a row again and gained the invulnerability skill. The more the demons used up their energy, the stronger Randy became, widening the gap between them. Several hundred years after these events, all the monsters lined up to fight Randy. The lad was surprised that he had gotten close to the demons, but on the other hand, it seemed natural after centuries of battles. Randy retrieved a rank card from his pocket, a magical artifact obtained when he first registered with the association. When the owner saturates it with his power, it displays the owner's characteristics. Randy hurriedly looked at his new abilities, for it had been a long time since he had looked at this card. When he took out this card, it flashed with a bright light and announced that he had already reached the level of an expert Hunter Plus. Randy had acquired so many skills that he could only dream of when he was on Earth. His status was already so high that he possessed many A-rank skills, but the first thing that caught his eye was the divine space art. The A rank included a divine art that granted immunity to all types of poison, the ability to control poison, and even absorb energy from it. The A rank also meant harmony of body and mind, allowing one to use one's body as one wished. A rank A Kuzushi granted the ability to channel your opponent's power back, even if it exceeded your own. Rank A invulnerability made the skin incredibly tough, able to withstand most attacks. Randy was amazed while reading about these skills. He thought that such skills were only available to hunters who had trained in unique A-rank martial arts like the Divine Twilight Art or the Divine Yin-Yang Art. Randy didn't know that Divine Space Arts, although developing slower than others, allowed for the creation of energy more powerful than any other martial art. And the guy has been practicing this art for over 1,000 years by the standards of this world. The protagonist thought his success was due to his magical assault, as he had no innate ability. The boy believed it was all part of the Scale Goddess's plan for his development and training. Through countless battles, his understanding of martial arts had almost reached perfection. He could flawlessly copy any martial style at a glance. However, he had not heard of a skill that allowed him to do so before. It was considered difficult to master at least one martial art in one lifetime. This skill would allow him to use different techniques depending on the situation, like a magician. Randy, even though it was the first time he had heard of it, realized that it was a very powerful skill. But looking at the card, the protagonist couldn't figure out another skill. He didn't have a rank. This skill was called World Resonance. The world resonated with him because of his proximity to reaching the pinnacle of existence. Randy read it, but didn't understand what it meant. He didn't know at the time that this was the thing that would make the whole world start going crazy. The guy had been in this world for years, and in that time he had befriended demons he had fought for centuries. The main character had always loved cooking, and he was happy to have regular customers. However, one day it became clear to him that his development in this world has completely stopped, and he needs to look for new adventures. The guy could no longer cultivate his energy. His growth was completely blocked. The protagonist realized that there were virtually no martial artists left with a strength greater than his own, and he needed to overcome this wall. Randy knew that there was only one way to get stronger, and that was to fight new enemies. He had set his sights on fighting an opponent many times more powerful than these weak demons. Based on that, he realized that he needed to fight someone who was stronger than him. Just as he was pondering this, someone knocked on the door. The protagonist politely opened the door and greeted the guest, assuming it was a new customer coming to eat his food. But he immediately noticed that a demon unlike any other stood before him. It looked much stronger and more intimidating. The demon turned to the guy and said he had heard a lot about him and wanted to test his skills. Randy felt the power of this demon and realized that it was much stronger than him. The demon had tremendous magical power that was impressive even for the demon race. The protagonist decided that this is a new stage of his training and he should test his strength. The demon pulled out a huge ingot of adamantium that was of unprecedented size. The boy was amazed at the size of this stone. He had never seen such a huge ingot before. The demon introduced himself as Varigoth, the first avatar of the Lord of Blood and Battle. He said he had an offer from his master for the protagonist. Varigoth announced that his master, the Lord of Blood and Battles, has been watching Randy and wants him to become his avatar. Varigoth was sure that Randy would not refuse such an honor, even though he came from the outside world. Varigoth was not foolish enough to contradict the will of the constellation, especially when offered such a distinguished honor of becoming the avatar. The protagonist felt that it would be wrong to refuse such an offer. But Randy refused, claiming he already had a scale goddess and didn't want to become the avatar of another constellation. The Varigoth demon was furious at his refusal, for no one had ever dared to refuse him before. The protagonist felt a lot of pressure come over him, but he had been waiting for this moment as this was the powerful opponent he had been waiting for. Varigoth told the guy he didn't sense any constellation in him, but Randy continued to believe that this was just a test, and that he would become the avatar after successfully passing it. Varigoth was very surprised at what he heard. He thought someone had tricked the guy. But the protagonist did not listen to him and thought that the demon wanted to quarrel with him. Varagoth began to explain that his words made no sense. Constellations contract avatars because of their own desire. They do not choose unworthy avatars, and being desired by one constellation means that other constellations will also be interested in you. That's why a constellation immediately contracts with an avatar candidate so that others don't have time. If other constellations want to train their candidates, they do it on their territory. This prevents the possible interception of a candidate by other constellations, who will laugh at the constellation that lost its candidate for 10,000 years. But the protagonist disagreed with Varagoth and stated that his constellation had the unique art of foreseeing the future, and she chose him as her savior. Varagoth said that foreseeing the future was a rare gift, and she decided to trust such an imperfect ability. But Randy kept saying that his constellation was the best. Randy then began bragging to Varagoth about his past training and trials. Varagoth pondered, "For the magical abyss storm is impossible to control, even for constellations. It is a dangerous and powerful phenomenon," he said. But the protagonist still didn't believe him and claimed that his constellation was capable of controlling everything. After a long moment of reflection, Randy realized that Varagoth might not have been lying to him. He had begun to believe and had learned many things. However, he had enjoyed the process of becoming stronger so much that he had not questioned himself until now. Randy returned home with bitterness in his soul, realizing what a fool he had been for not asking himself important questions for centuries. The boy held back his tears as he knew each tear was burning his energy and courage. The next day, Randy approached Varagoth and informed him that he now realized he was not at the training facility and needed to return to Earth immediately. But Varagoth said he was sorry. But he could no longer leave the territory of the Lord of Blood and battles. After everything, Varagoth showed his true fighting form, realizing that Randy would not agree to go with him, and they would have to fight. Varagoth took to the air and said he would have to destroy a gem like Randy. Varagoth immediately understood Randy's fighting style, and realized that he had a special movement technique and didn't use magic. Randy's movements were much faster than teleportation magic. Randy explained that it was a divine space art movement technique that utilized energy, and it was called moonwalking. Varagoth raised his hands up and a black hole appeared. He said it was very interesting, but he had no intention of continuing any longer, and was ready to fight Randy. Varagoth used bloody baptism, and a large area of the ground was covered in red poison. The protagonist realized that Varagoth was very powerful, using so much magic. Randy wouldn't be able to withstand it for long, even with the poison and vulnerability skill. The red poison, called the bloody baptism, was a downpour of scarlet magic that melted and destroyed everything that touched this land. This moment demonstrated the entire difference in power between Varagoth and Randy. The protagonist survived the ordeal thanks to a divine space art that warned him of imminent danger. However, when he faced a crisis situation and realized that the enemy was much stronger, Randy's mind remained calm. The discomfort of having wasted his time due to miscommunication was gone. Randy's mind said he could resist, and it reminded him of the moment when he found himself in a magical storm. It wasn't just the quickness that was important. It was the sense of flow in his hands. After meditating, Randy's martial arts proficiency increased. He had acquired the incredible speed skill, a movement technique that allowed him to instantly travel to a desired location. Varagoth was amazed and couldn't believe that Randy had completely dodged the deadly attack. Varagoth had always thought that martial arts were studied by weaklings, but now he realized his mistake. Varagoth got even more angry and started using magic, limiting his access to mana. On the other hand, martial arts required the user's inner strength and had an energy limit compared to magic. Varagoth directed a stream of mana at the protagonist and began to fight at full strength, realizing that martial arts could strike as well. Varagoth drew his sword and reported that the slaves had staged a rebellion in the territory of a certain constellation. They resisted the laws of this world as they could no longer use Manu. However, suppressing the rebellion was not an easy task. The main character became interested in the story and asked the demon what would happen if he used magic. Varagoth told him that after his body was melted by the blood baptism, Randy would meet the Lord of Blood. The fight continued, and Varagoth thought Randy was special as no one had ever fought him for so long before. He believed in his victory as his master gifted him with a bloody axe. After swinging the axe, there was a massive explosion. The fight had been going on for an hour now, and Randy realized that if it continued like this, he would lose. He looked for weaknesses in the magic, but he hadn't found any yet. For the first time in a long time, the protagonist was on the verge of defeat, which made him furious. Before him stood an enemy far superior in strength. With each attack he made, he felt himself growing stronger. Randy gathered energy into one fist, creating a fist of energy, and struck with all his might. It was a powerful blow that Varagoth felt, but it wasn't enough to overpower him. Varagoth wondered how much strength Randy still had left to use such hard attacks, as they required a huge amount of energy. The use of all skills such as Kuzushi and incredible speed was for defense. The problem was the attack power to break through the layers of defense magic, and Randy decided to take a chance and use a fist of energy, which would require a great deal of effort. The protagonist realized that he needed to do something about it as the fight was nearing its end. Randy decided to create a fist of energy by compressing the energy. It was a risky move as he would expend a lot of energy after this attack. He regarded the energy compression technique as the materialization of energy. Even the greatest martial artist on Earth, Xiao Wan, could only hold materialization for a moment due to the enormous energy consumption and could not use it in actual combat. However, Randy had surpassed Xiao Wan's skill over 100 years ago and decided to use this technique to attack the Varagoth demon. Varagoth felt a rather strong blow after swinging his axe. The protagonist realized that he was on the verge of defeat, but he kept fighting, striving to overcome his powerful opponent. After that blow, black blood came from Varagoth's mouth, and Randy thought that was the end of him. The protagonist destroyed the blood shield spell. Randy looked at Varagoth and realized that this technique didn't destroy him completely. If Randy used any more of his energy, he would be completely drained and fall to the ground. The other demons were watching it all from afar and were simply shocked by their battle. They were surprised that the serious Varagoth had been fighting Randy for 6 months by the time of the Abyss. They considered the man a true madman and a legend. Varagoth realized that Randy was at a dead end. Although he could break through Varagoth's defense with a materialized divine space art energy attack, but he couldn't use this deadly attack because of the huge energy consumption. The protagonist tried to recover his energy as quickly as possible, but he still needed time to use the cosmic aura once more. That gave Varagoth plenty of time to get his defenses back up. Varagoth said he had spent too much time and effort on this. He could no longer hold back the Lord of Blood and Battles. He wanted to finish with a single attack, and from his tremendous energy, a strong wind came up that almost knocked Randy off his feet. Varagoth began to call upon the Lord of Blood and Battles to bless his powers for victory. After this technique, Varagoth's strength grew by leaps and bounds, and fangs and horns began to appear on his body. The protagonist looked at it with fear, realizing that he was in great danger. The protagonist realized what caused Varagoth to shrink in size. He did this to increase his speed and offensive line speed in the same zone. At one point in the fight, Randy realized that his invulnerability had been punctured, and it would take him a while to regain it. The protagonist told himself that if he lost even a little bit of concentration, he would die immediately, and he didn't need to relax for a second. Since the moment the guy entered the Abyss, Randy had never used all of his energy in a day. In the Abyss, with enemies all around, using all the energy was tantamount to suicide. However, the guy realized that he was in a difficult situation and had no way out. The protagonist decided to use all the energy at once because he had no other choice. Randy concentrated all the energy in one hand and released it on the Varagoth demon. After the attack, the demon flew back about a meter. At this moment, he had mastered a new technique called cosmic energy breakthrough. Varagoth cried out in pain as this technique was quite powerful and ripped off his right arm. Varagoth felt that it didn't matter how he had to overpower this man. He must finish him off, or Randy would become even stronger, to the point where he would no longer be able to do damage to Randy. Varagoth could not allow this to happen in the territory under the control of the Lord of Blood and Battles. He couldn't just stand by and watch a new constellation be born in his great master's territory. Suddenly, a very large light began to glow strongly, and Varagoth couldn't understand what was happening. He saw that Randy was much bigger than he was before and couldn't believe his eyes. At that moment, Randy realized the essence of his power. If he could take Manu outside his body, he had achieved true mastery. The protagonist had reached perfection in comprehending the skill from the rank of materialized energy. Now he could freely use materialized energy. His skill was called Good Giant Assassin and was from a rank. His eyes began to glow with blue flames. Lightning formed around his body, and he grabbed the Varagoth demon by the neck, preparing to deliver the final blow. At this time, their fight was being watched by the Abyss constellation, who showed interest in Randy. The Lord of Blood and Battles was furious, and they were watching the battle as well. The Varagoth demon lay on the ground and admitted his defeat. He could not believe that he had lost to a human, for he had never lost to anyone but his master before. The protagonist defeated the first avatar of the Lord of Blood and Battles. For this victory, Randy received power from the world through the skill Master of his craft. He was approached by a defeated Varagoth who was on the verge of death, and told the lad that he had earned the right to reject his offer to become a master. Randy thanked him for a good fight from the bottom of his heart and was very grateful. Varagoth gave him advice. He didn't know which constellation would offer him to become an avatar, but advised him not to accept the offer, as Randy could become much stronger, so much so that no constellation would look down on him. Varagoth wished him to glory in this abyss and become the first man of the constellations. The protagonist looked at him and said he would listen to what he had to say. He became a master at which he perceived the world as himself. Randy began to feel a whole new energy. The gazes of the constellations watching him were very surprised by his skills. The protagonist began to feel the constellations' gazes upon him. He felt how powerful they were. The protagonist got a shiver down his body as he imagined that he could become as strong as the constellations. Constellations were constantly targeting each other's territories. If someone accidentally left their post, they were caught in an instant. That is why the constellations watched over the world without leaving their thrones and those worthy to become their avatars. Then the protagonist realized that they had been watching him the whole time, just like the people on the streamers. The Lord of Blood and Battles set a reward for Randy. Now every creature in the area is after the protagonist. Then the protagonist announced to everyone that he would become a constellation while those watching him. He has nothing to fear anymore. The protagonist easily defeated these monsters that had begun to hunt him down. He realized that he could no longer leave his fate to the constellations after having come this far. Randy went back to the small house to get this cauldron of magic. He noticed that there was quite a lot of energy in this cauldron. Randy stopped looking at the notifications and messages from the constellations. He didn't care about the taunts and temptations that came from them. Randy decided that he would leave this place and go on his way. At this time, the servants of the Angel Mistress of Scales were looking for Randy. But on their way, they came across some very brazen animals who immediately pounced on them. She repelled their attack with ease, and the other demons were surprised by her strength. Then the angel came to them and asked them once more if they had seen him. Then they politely replied that they had not, and asked the angel to spare them. She was an angel of the virtuous goddess of Scales. Her name was Adaquaniel, and she was still searching the entire abyss for a human. Talking to the races that could talk and telepathizing with the monsters after they were defeated, she asked wordlessly if anyone had seen Randy. Since the Avatar rarely left his territory, the constellations were curious as to what was going on after all. Also, people support streamers and avatars of other constellations. For constellations in their own territory and following their own rules, watching the avatars of other constellations was quite simply entertainment. Now back to the abandoned sector in the territory of Lord of Blood and Battles. Randy traveled the world and continued to train along the way. With the master's degree, the divine space arts had been refined. Now the amount of energy didn't matter, and the skill of a martial arts master allowed Randy to use all martial arts perfectly. However, he continued to practice his space fist, believing that this technique was not good enough in his execution. Just like when he was first learning the divine space art, he put his entire soul into every strike. When Randy decided to leave the territory of Lord of Blood and Battles after defeating Varagoth, he decided to test his skills in the mysterious skill of world resonance. Then he picked up his card and saw that it said his title was Invincible Master of Training, which meant that no person or creature had trained more than him. Then Randy realized that he had reached a degree of mastery in the divine space art. He had refined his skills, and now they were simply flawless. He realized how he should become stronger and gain constellation status. Then Randy thought he knew how to do it all. After earning his Master of Divine Space Arts degree, he thought it was as if the world was whispering in his ear. In front of him, he met a bunch of demons who were telling him that he really thought he could escape from them. As long as Randy was in the territory ruled by the Lord of Blood and Battles, it would be very hard for him to escape from the demons. But the protagonist didn't even pay attention to them. He looked at his card and thought that he needed to strengthen his essence by following his principles. He thought that the world was telling him that this was the way to become a constellation. The main character just walked past the zombies and didn't even pay attention to them, as they were too weak for him. And then the protagonist realized the secret. He needs to constantly train and never lose. Randy continued his journey and thought it was perfect for him as he had always loved to work out. And so he continued to train, leaving the corner of the abyss where the gaze of the constellations could not reach him. He could feel himself growing stronger and stronger. In the battle with Varagoth, in addition to the new world resonance, He had gained 2 new skills related to his essence. In order for Randy to use this skill, he needed to fight someone who was stronger than him. He realized that if he lost, all would be lost. It sounded pretty complicated, but the main character liked everything and wanted to get serious. The guy continued his journey and met a real monster in front of him, hoping that this monster would be stronger than him and help him improve his skill. But it turned out to be an old friend he used to travel with. Randy was very surprised to meet him. The main character noticed that his friend had a lot of his brothers behind him, and the guy was very happy for him that he had found his family. Suddenly another monster, much bigger than the other monsters by times, appeared out of nowhere. The ground was cracking from this monster. It was a supergiant hydra with 9 heads that had never appeared on Earth before and belonged to the highest rank of monsters. The whole world had to be on full alert against it. The protagonist realized that it radiated a great deal of magical power, and he got goosebumps. He was definitely stronger than the Varigoth. This monster was known as the 9-headed hydra, or simply the 9-headed snake. At this point, Randy found Constellation watching annoying. There were constellations that had become so by watching Randy's adventures. But most of them scoffed, mocked him, or were even hostile. Constellations, such as the Lord of Blood in battles, whose first avatar suffered a crushing defeat, were particularly strong towards him. To them, Randy was a beast that had not yet reached adulthood. That was why they had to make every effort to prevent Randy from becoming a constellation. That was why Randy retreated to a neutral zone where the constellations couldn't follow him. However, this lawless zone was where the strongest ruled. The 9-headed hydra began to attack the protagonist with its energy. It was a place where the monsters were comparable to a constellation in strength. The main character was in complete shock. It was simply amazing magical power. It was like a bulldozer that destroyed everything in its path. The guy's valiant giant killer skill was activated. If Randy defeats the hydra, his essence power will be enhanced. The skill Master of his craft was also activated. If he defeats the hydra, his essence powers will also be enhanced. The protagonist realized that his skills made him fight this monster. But even without them, his choices remain the same, because this monster won't just let him go. Randy pointed his finger at the snake and yelled that it was bullying his friend and his family. No matter how strong the snake was, it would regret it. The 9-headed serpent pounced upon him with all its strength. It is said that even the constellations fell to their knees from its venom. Randy could feel the bloodlust coming from their 9 heads. Most opponents would just freeze because of such telepathy and bloodlust. But the protagonist is already accustomed to such trials. He has already participated in many battles in the territory of the Lord of Blood and battles. They clashed head-on, and there was a massive explosion due to their battle. Randy was able to cut off the head of the snake with the first attack. There were 8 heads left, and they were just out of their minds at this brazenness, for no one had ever fought them so openly before. It wasn't that simple. Hydra had regained her head thanks to divine regeneration. The 9-headed Hydra began to prepare its attack. It was going to release a lot of poison. It was said that even the constellations could not withstand their poison. The protagonist wondered, why would they talk about their attack? But the answer was simple, because it was a monster that even the constellations feared. The 9-headed Hydra merely announces the fate of the enemy. The enemy has no choice but to accept his fate. But it wasn't about Randy. He attacked them from the sky, and Hydra couldn't figure out how he stopped their poison. The guy looked at his hands, and it felt like his head was about to explode from the telepathic screaming. If he hadn't been perfectly immune to poisons, he might have gotten hurt. His hands began to glow with blue flames, but the sensation was not the same as when fighting a Varigoth. It far surpassed the power of divine space art and energy materialization. The protagonist could fight on equal terms with the 9-headed Hydra himself. Randy was not cornered. On the contrary, he was able to take down Hydra with a single blow. However, the fight didn't end there. Hydra couldn't keep up with him as he was quite fast. He regenerated very quickly. But the protagonist realized that if he fell under the Hydra's breath, he would be in great danger. Randy had invulnerability skills that were supposed to protect him from any damage. But even in a fight against a Varigoth, he couldn't block all of its powerful magic. And Hydra was many times stronger than the Varigoth. Blocking invulnerability attacks was impossible. Randy could step on her with moonwalk. He improved his moonwalking skills so much that he started running on Hydra's breath. As Randy moved between the safe zones, he kept telling himself that he needed to be much faster, and a miracle happened. In an instant, the flames and poison spewed by Hydra paused. Time slowed, as if fulfilling Randy's dream of becoming faster. Hydra couldn't control her breathing willfully. But none of the martial arts Randy possessed had a similar effect. The protagonist attacked with all speed and began destroying the Hydra that couldn't catch up to him. In an instant, Randy realized it was for the same reason that his attacks were much stronger than they should have been with his level of martial arts and skills. The power of the essence was not the same as enhancing his magic or martial arts. It was the power that allowed him to change reality. According to his imagination, he had obtained much more than what he wanted. He obtained the skill of insight and utilized the full power of essence. Essence power was a power that could change reality. Now, he could control this power as he wished. As a result of the epiphany, the essence power skill was strengthened. The power of essence is the power to allow constellations, beings who have reached the peak of existence, to rule in the abyss. The constellations use this power to transform the abyss, create kingdoms, and offer gifts and blessings to their followers. As long as the constellations have enough essence power, they can do anything. Hydra was furious. She already wanted to finish this guy off quickly. The Hydro-Geekin soul had a strong will. With the current power of the essence, Randy couldn't shake or change its will. The main character's goal was to change the power of the entity. He realized that it would be hard for him to change Hydra. He had to change himself. The power of Randy's essence penetrated his materialized energy and became a sharp blade capable of cutting through Hydra's huge body. He cut one Hydra's head open and it could no longer regenerate, for he had sealed divine regeneration with his blade. The protagonist realized that this wasn't the end, and he didn't want to let his emotions get the best of him. He began to defeat the Hydra by cutting its heads off one by one. They thought it was simply impossible since they don't regenerate. They couldn't think that they could lose to such a lowly thing as a human. Hydra wanted to hide from Randy. She wanted to hide in the cave and wait for the regeneration to return to normal. The Hydra started to run away, for there were only 2 heads left. The rest had been cut off. But it was very hard for them to hide with such a big body. One of the heads was against running away, for it was a real humiliation for them. But the other head was wiser and said that they had to hide so that the regeneration would return, or Hydra would die. But it was a real shame for them, for they had lived for years and had never faced such humiliation. But the main character was much faster than them, and running away was pointless. He was already taller than them and was already launching his attack. It was such a powerful attack that it tore the Hydra apart. Randy's friends were shocked. No one had ever been able to defeat Hydra before. After this attack, Randy could barely stay on his feet, but he recognized that this snake was a strong opponent. After the victory, Randy's powers of existence increased thanks to the good giant bearer skill. The world began to resonate even more strongly with the protagonist. This was due to the Hydra's blood covering him. He had inherited Hydra's karma and divine regeneration. Now his invulnerable body could regenerate endlessly. Randy looked at his ability card and thought that he had a very strange life. Being a martial arts master, he never thought about getting a lot of skills. On a normal Earth, even one such skill would have made him an A-rang hunter. But that didn't matter anymore. He had decided to go beyond being a hunter and embark on the path of a constellation. The protagonist asked his friend if he needed meat, scales, or bones. The stone serpent bounced back, remembering Randy's actions long ago when he ate poisonous fish. Hydra's body emitted a frightening poisonous aura. It was dangerous for even Randy to touch Hydra's body. But the protagonist decided to take a chance and cut the Hydra into small pieces. He wanted to eat all the meat before continuing his journey. Before Randy left, Stone Serpent decided to give him a necklace as a thank you for Randy saving his family from Hydra. An artifact in the form of a necklace capable of transporting objects into subspace has been discovered. This necklace had a unique ability. It could draw in cooked meat sliced from the Hydra. Hydra bones were useful for creating various items and weapons, and its tough scales could be used to make armor. The protagonist was pleased, as he could use the necklace to transport the cauldron and raw ore, making it easier for him to carry these heavy items. Randy told the serpent that during their separation, he had mined a lot of adamantium stored in a cauldron that had been obtained from the stone serpent earlier. The protagonist wanted to learn how to process ore to make a skillet and cutting board, simplifying his culinary art. The snake's gifts didn't end, and she gave him a pink crystal. From the moment Randy decided to become a constellation, he began receiving messages about other constellations. He could also see the power of creatures such as Varagoths and Hydras through the use of the Necklace of Subspace. This diamond was referred to as unenriched orichalcum, a metal that emitted pure magical energy. Orichalcum is a metal that exudes powerful magical energy, while adamantium is a strong metal that absorbs magic. The protagonist dreamed of making a knife and cutlery out of orichalcum, being passionate about cooking. Stone Snake began to convince his wife that despite his oddities, Randy was a kind and strong man. Randy has studied cooking for thousands of years as a demonic pub owner. and has achieved a high level of skill. He encountered difficulty in handling the meat of a powerful being who refused to become an avatar of the constellation. Devouring the meat of a monster from the abyss gave strength proportional to the creature devoured, but improper cooking made the dish deadly poisonous. But Randy didn't back down, considering cooking with complicated ingredients a kind of workout. The protagonist noticed a significant increase in his constellation power and could feel the energy emanating from his snake friends. Randy understood why the constellations were eager to increase their followers and their interest in Earth. Earth was envisioned as a world with billions of potential followers. The ability to capture it could give the constellation the power to change the abyss itself. The protagonist pondered ways to quickly return to Earth to prevent the future predicted by the goddess of scales. The Earth Serpent drew the demon, showing Randy who was after them. Randy began his search for this demon, not wanting to engage in battle with demons after his adventures in Bloodlord territory and battles. However, he was informed that there was a demon stronger than Varigoth and Hydra. The protagonist met 4 beings who called him the Invincible Master of Training. The girl notified Randy that her master wished to meet with him, and this meeting was extremely important. Randy asked what would happen if he refused, but was told that in that case, they would just let him go. The protagonist thought the offer was suspicious, but still agreed, intrigued by what they wanted from him. On the way out, Randy asked the girl if she had heard of Earth. The girl replied that she had heard rumors of a constellation fighting for the gate leading there. Randy suddenly lashed out at the girl, demanding more information, to which she replied that she didn't know anything else. The girl added that she had heard about the large number of souls on Earth, and that her master could help take over the planet. However, Randy's accompanying boyfriend immediately refuted these words, saying that he planned to prevent other constellations from taking over the Earth. The girl was surprised by this answer and noted that Randy was not only strong but also honorable. The main character didn't understand why demons were called nightmarish, because they seemed friendly and sociable to him. On the way to the master, the guy met a demon who wanted to eat him. She was screaming at him to give her his wishes. She was immediately detained by the servants, screaming to be let go because she knows they want to eat him too. Randy asked the girl what it was and who she was. The girl replied that they were nightmare succubi, weak to the desires of other people. Then the protagonist realized that they were living off other desires. He knew that he shouldn't have a strong fascination with desires. He promised himself that he would be fine without a significant other, and he didn't need a good meal or a comfortable place to sleep. They came to the master's chamber, which was called Dreams and Desires. A guy asked a girl why she wouldn't go into the palace with him. The girl replied that a creature like her was not worthy to be between the constellations. Randy told her he wasn't a constellation, and he asked the girl to go with him, for he did not know the whole palace. The girl immediately agreed and said he was very nice to her. The protagonist suspected something would be far more dangerous than he realized. Randy wanted to use her as a human shield. He was sure the constellation would never want to lose its precious avatar. This meeting was held on foreign soil. This constellation was certainly more adept at handling the power of essence than Randy. A lot can happen. Even though Randy was invited, he never let his guard down. After all, the title of undefeated master trainer is not given to just anyone. As soon as Randy walked into his room, he felt like he'd just woken up. He turned his head and saw the sleeping girl. He couldn't understand what was going on here. Randy didn't notice the constellation was behind him. He didn't hear it at all. "So you're the constellation that's been doing a lot of shows lately. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time." The constellation turned to Randy. Randy smiled and said he didn't want to upset her, but he wasn't a constellation yet. He still had a lot of work to do on that. The constellation disagreed with Randy, because whoever steps on the path of a constellation can also be a constellation, because he's capable of the same things they are. The constellation said it was about him too. After all, he could use essences like the other constellations. The main character looked at him very obliquely, because he looked like a child. Randy began to slowly remember exactly what had happened when he entered the constellation chamber. Randy wondered if I hadn't done enough. After all, he'd been wandering the abyss for 10 years. He perfected the divine cosmic art and reached the peak of martial arts. He had even reached a level that was higher than all existing ones. The main character asked why he tries to charm or seduce people, because that is the essence of dreams and desires. Beings who enter this room fulfill their desires and find peace. It's hard to refuse my gift if you're not a constellation. Randy was excited. He wondered what she wanted from him. Constellation smiled and said to gladly explain everything if he joined the alliance. Randy was surprised at such a suggestion, for it was very unexpected what the constellation might think of people. Constellation smiled and said he was right. Constellation are selfish. After all, they can't do otherwise. But selfishness does not always mean loneliness or brokenness. If anything, he allows them to cooperate with them. After saying that, Randy realized that the constellation had decided to form an alliance because it would be good for her. The constellation said he was right. After all, a mortal looks up to them as gods, but constellations are not easy either. If a constellation shows any hint of weakness, a strong constellation will attack it without hesitation. And that's why this constellation wanted an alliance. Some constellations' future of survival is not satisfactory. The devastation and desolation caused by the constellation's obsession with conquest. It will all lead everyone to despair in which no desire can exist, and the nightmare will no longer be something to feed on. Randy asked if expanding the territory wouldn't solve the problem. Constellation thought he was talking about a farm by way of wishes, an idea that could only come from Constellation, who was originally human. The Constellation said they can't enjoy limitless potential like mortals. Just as Randy was now beyond the reach of brokenness or self-soothing, so too the Constellation was not free to control anything outside of dreams and desires, without the risk of losing the power of essence and becoming weak. The Constellation showed its small town and said that nightmares require high-quality, three-dimensional desires. Not the kind that generated fear and anger, but a desire filled with ambition, or a sense of achieving a world of abundance. Constellation said she's just a nightmare god and can't do what she said she did in the real world. The protagonist realized she wanted to create the alliance of the weak and the alliance of the truistic constellations. Randy tells her that she has exposed a lot to her weaknesses, why she is not afraid if he turns out to be bad and greedy. She smiled and said she'd been thinking about it for a long time, but she thought it would be easier to negotiate with him than with the other constellations. But she kept quiet about the fact that she'd decided that when she saw his desire. So if Randy found out, he'd be more careful. In truth, Randy radiated great desire, but none of it was about conquest or power. The only thing on his mind was training. He always told himself if he stopped training just because he had achieved perfection in martial arts, he would lose his muscles and his desire to work. Randy said it sounded like a pretty good deal, but he still had a few more questions. Constellation was excited about the questions. She wanted to answer them all quickly. Randy asked what he should do if they formed an alliance. After all, he was pretty busy and thought he wouldn't be able to help her. After his questions, she laughed a lot. She thought he was going to ask for benefits, but he started asking for responsibilities. He was a unique person for her. She answered him that as long as the other constellations weren't attacking the alliance, there was nothing to be done. There is no point in duty. A constellation doesn't take part in something that isn't good for them. She took the bird in her arms and told him he had to do something if he wanted to. The battle between the constellations has been going on for so long it's getting boring. So no matter where you are, 'cause we're gonna be there for each other. They shook hands and Randy said he agreed to form the alliance. Constellation was very happy that he had agreed. Randy thought he was a newcomer who had just begun the journey of becoming a constellation. He was sure the abyss was full of dangerous and pretend constellations. Being in an alliance seemed safer than trying to go it alone, and he thought he could get some help getting back to Earth. Suddenly appeared out of nowhere, a large firestorm that was M-high. The main character was very surprised to see a kitten emerge from this firestorm. Kitten said he'd be nice to them if Randy was his avatar, but instead he did something stupid by joining the small constellation alliance. When he remembered they'd talked to him before, it was a member of the small constellation union. Randy asked why he was talking to him by telepathy, since he was standing right in front of him. The girl said that usually the constellation did not leave its territory. Randy then realized that it was just the two of them in the alliance, and it was obvious from their faces that they were rather embarrassed to admit it. The kitten angrily says, "So what?" After all, it was still profitable even though there were only 3 of them. Kitten says he heard Randy collects adamantium and orichalcum. He says he can make them into whatever Randy wants. The girl said this kitten is a famous blacksmith in the abyss. He can make any weapon for Randy as a gift for joining the alliance. The protagonist was thrilled with the gift because he had never thought of it, but he had very little orichalcum, so he asked the girl to do it later when he collected more. The girl said that honestly she thought it would be much harder to negotiate with him, but he accepted her offer before she could bring gifts. The girl again said that the constellation was by nature an arrogant and selfish creature, so before they met, they prepared something that might interest Randy. After that, he received an orang martial arts scroll. It was called Energy Vampirism. Additionally, he received orichalcum ingots. The boy looked at his body and was delighted, because it was a martial art that had the effect of absorbing magical energy. The girl said that energy vampirism was a martial art created by nightmares, but she thought it would suit him very well. The girl believed that there was no nightmare who could become a master of this art. Randy began to wonder if he had achieved greatness in the martial arts, but using magic was a much more effective way than studying martial arts. Randy threw all the bars on the ground and said he'd been collecting them for over 10,000 years. He couldn't wait for them to make him things out of those ingots. Lava's kitten of magma, excitedly asking what kind of armor he wished for, he would be honored to do so. Kitten says he can create an epic sword and shield with that many materials. He offered to create an indestructible shield of adamantium and the strongest sword of orichalcum. But Randy said that's not what he wanted. He wanted kitchenware. He wanted an adamantium skillet and cutting board, and a walnut knife and utensils. Lava's kitten thought he was joking at first and asked him to answer seriously because this is serious business. But Randy said he was dead serious. From the moment he got his first adamantium nugget in the abyss, his dream had changed. He wanted the best kitchen utensils with which to prepare any ingredient in the abyss. Lava's kitten just had nothing to say to him. He was completely shocked by his words. The protagonist noticed his reaction and said it felt like he was forcing him to do something terrible. But a promise is a promise, so the cat from Lava fulfills his request by putting his whole soul into it. The girl said it was time for her to answer Randy's questions. After all, he said he wanted to know what the awakening was. Randy said it's true that he's still an incomplete constellation. He's just starting to act the constellation way. When he defeated the Varagoth and reached a degree of mastery, he saw a message from the world that said his world resonance was growing stronger. The world is eager to hear his cry. And Varagoth, in his final moment, said, "Become a constellation, not an avatar." But the guy kept thinking that he's still a man with powerful martial arts, and he needs to take one more step to become a constellation. But the girl simply replied that she'd already told him everything and that he was a constellation. She explained to him that there's no such thing as an incomplete constellation. A constellation is a constellation is a constellation is that simple. But Randy still asked further. He wondered what awakening was. After all, she had said he still had to awaken. The girl replied that she meant that he still hadn't realized he was a constellation. Even at the moment, he thought he was incomplete, though the girl realized that he was a very special